The scent of espresso lingered like an old jazz tune, warm, restless, and slightly bitter. In the heart of Brooklyn's gentrifying Flatbush Avenue, the corner cafe hadn't changed much since Zoe Nakamura was a kid. The windows still fogged up on humid mornings, the floors creaked in complaint beneath each step, and the chalkboard menu, revised daily, was a collage of misspellings and ambition. She stood there now, 20 minutes into her new part-time gig, camouflaged in a black apron and faded jeans, her trademark black turtleneck traded for a soft cotton tee. A baseball cap tugged low over her sharp cheekbones obscured half her face, but even so, her posture betrayed precision. She stacked sugar packets like code blocks, her fingers twitching unconsciously, calculating more than she admitted. A barista. She was playing a barista. Not Zoe Nakamura, Forbes' most elusive billionaire. Under 35, founder of Synapse, a machine learning platform that revolutionized education access, not the billionaire with secret patents and a board of investors who growled if she ghosted a quarterly. Here, she was just Z. Behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed like a warning. Zoe reached for the cup just as a broad-shouldered man reached for napkins. Collision, inevitability. Then, splash. Shit, he growled. Zoe gasped. Her hands flew up, too late. The latte arced through the air in an elegant, unfortunate parabola before painting itself across his gray Henley shirt. Coffee dripped from his forearm, trailing toward a grease-stained rag he pulled from his back pocket like a gun. "I am so sorry," Zoe stammered. "That was completely my fault. I didn't—" "It's fine," he muttered, blotting the liquid. But his gaze landed on her face, dark, assessing, slow. "Don't worry about it, princess. Accidents happen." "Princess?" Zoe blinked. "Excuse me?" He jerked his chin, eyes the color of weathered steel narrowing. "The way you flinched. You look like someone who's never had to clean their own mess." She stared, words curdling in her throat. He didn't recognize her. Not the eyes that had once stared out from tech blogs, not the founder who dodged press like it carried disease. No, to him, she was just some clumsy barista, with soft hands and bad timing. "I clean my messes just fine," she murmured. Finally, he raised an eyebrow, gave her a once-over. "Sure you do." Then he was gone, the bell above the door giving a single accusing chime as it shut behind him. Zoe watched him cross the sidewalk and disappear into the garage next door. Price Auto Repair. She recognized the name. It had been there when she was 10, and her mother's old Civic coughed its final breath. He looked different from what she remembered. Broader. Harder. A man now with calluses and a burden in his gait. Logan Price. He hadn't flinched at the heat of the coffee, but her presence had lit something taut in him. She couldn't tell if it was disdain or interest. Probably both. She exhaled, chest tight. So that was Logan. Well, so much for staying invisible. Later that afternoon, Zoe sat in the break room with a cooling chai and a mission that felt heavier than the paper cup in her hand. She hadn't just come back to Flatbush out of nostalgia. Her latest concept, CivicLink, was a tech-powered community hub for underserved neighborhoods, blending digital education, microfinancing, and local business support. The idea was noble. Investors hated it. Cameron Duke had called it a PR stunt with bad ROI. But Zoe didn't care. CivicLink wasn't about vanity metrics. It was about grounding. About giving someone like her mother a place to restart. She just needed the right pilot location. Flatbush had been on her mind for months. Still raw, still resistant to tech, gentrification still real. She took the barista job to scout the area anonymously, to observe the neighborhood's rhythms and listen not from the boardroom, but from the ground. She hadn't expected Logan. From the cafe's side window, Zoe watched as he bent over the hood of an ancient Dodge, his forearms flexing beneath sun and sweat and rusted bolts. He moved like someone who didn't believe in wasted motion. Intentional. Quietly bruised. He had no idea she was the girl next door, or the woman on the magazine cover, his youngest sister, probably resented in econ class. Her heart gave an uneven lurch. Careful, Zoe. This wasn't a romance novel. But as Logan wiped his brow with the back of his hand, she felt her fingers twitch again, not to code, but to touch. Not to build, but to connect. And for the first time in months, she didn't feel like a ghost in her own story. The hum of the espresso machine faded as the lunch rush thinned. Zoe leaned against the back counter, her fingers still sticky with syrup from a hastily made caramel drizzle. The clatter of ceramic and clinks of spoons had finally quieted, but inside her, something else stirred, an electric unrest, sharp as static. Through the window, Logan Price moved like time didn't matter to him. Deliberate, unhurried, head bent under the hood of an old Cadillac with a cracked bumper and a heart still trying to beat. There was something magnetic about watching a man do honest work, his sleeves pushed up, a grease smudge on his jaw. She wondered what kind of music he liked, what kind of books he didn't admit to reading, whether he'd ever been in love or broken by it. "You're staring." Zoe startled. Jessa, the other barista, slid next to her with a smirk and a peppermint stick poking from her teeth like a cigarette. "I'm observing," Zoe replied quickly, brushing a crumb from her apron. "Ooh, that's Logan Price," Jessa said, cocking a hip against the counter. "Local grump. Fixes everything but his own trust issues." Zoe raised a brow. "You know him?" "Everyone knows him. His dad ran the garage before he passed. Logan took over and practically raised his siblings after their mom left. Won't let anyone help. Typical wounded wolf stuff." Zoe looked again. Logan wiped his hands on a rag, his gaze focused but distant. There was a loneliness to him, thick and silent, like a coat he wore too long. "He seems—" Zoe searched for the right word. "Hot?" Jessa offered, grinning. "Yeah, like a burned marshmallow. Crusty outside, gooey inside." Zoe couldn't help the soft laugh that escaped her. "I was going to say, complicated." "Same thing." That night, Zoe returned to the small brownstone apartment she'd rented under her assistant's name. Sparse and rented month to month, it had zero digital surveillance, no high-end locks, and no trace of her real identity. The space was clean, clinical, but held something soothing in its blankness, a place to not be known. She opened her laptop and tapped through encrypted windows. A new message blinked from Cameron Duke. "Duke, we need to discuss your rebrand as a waitress. Investors are circling like sharks. Zoe. If you keep ghosting us, don't be surprised when the board starts taking calls without you." She closed the message. She had 3 weeks before she had to show anything tangible for CivicLink. No pitch decks, no polished rollouts, just insight, ground truth, community context. The old Zoe would have taken a meeting, put on her surgical calm, and smiled like she gave a damn. But Zoe, the one who now couldn't stop thinking about the grease-smudged mechanic next door, wasn't playing by Cameron's rules anymore. 2 days passed. Logan didn't come back to the cafe. She saw him, sure always under a car, or hauling boxes, or elbow deep in someone's engine. But he didn't look her way. Until Thursday. Zoe was sweeping the front step of the cafe when she heard the clang of a wrench drop. She turned instinctively. Logan stood on the garage's threshold, arms crossed, jaw taut. "You're the only one who sweeps like the sidewalk's going to give you answers." She blinked. "I believe in clean transitions." He smirked. "Barely." "You always talk like that?" he asked, stepping closer. His walk was solid, grounded. "Like you're building sentences out of blueprints?" Zoe flushed. "I suppose I do." Logan tilted his head. "So what's your story?" "What do you mean?" "I mean—" He reached into his back pocket, pulled out a rag, wiped his palms absently. "People don't just drop into Flatbush and take minimum wage jobs without a reason. You don't move like someone who's used to being told what to do." Zoe's heartbeat flickered. "Maybe I wanted to start over." His eyes narrowed slightly. "You hiding from something?" "No." "A beat?" "Yes." Honesty hung between them like damp linen. "I'm hiding from being seen the wrong way," she finally said, voice softer than she meant. He looked at her for a long moment. "People think money's the root of all evil, but it's really just a really loud mask." She flinched. He noticed. "I said something wrong?" Zoe shook her head. "No. You said something very right." Their eyes held for a second too long. Then the clatter of a delivery truck broke the moment, and Logan backed away. I should get back to work. Wait, Zoe said. What if I bring you coffee tomorrow? As a truce. For the spill. Logan's lips twitched. Black. No sugar. Same way you take your mornings? He cracked a real smile then. It didn't quite reach his eyes, but it was closer. You don't know how I take anything yet. Chapter 2. Coffee and Combustion. The next morning, Flatbush woke slowly, like an old cat stretching in the sun. Steam rose from subway grates, and the sidewalk shimmered from an overnight drizzle. In front of the cafe, Zoe stood with 2 cups of coffee balanced carefully in her hands, and a flutter in her chest she couldn't program her way out of. She told herself it was part of the assignment, community engagement, observational immersion, but her pulse betrayed her. Across the street, Logan was already at work, kneeling beside a beat-up Ford pickup, one hand braced on the chassis, while the other twisted a socket wrench with quiet precision. She crossed the street before she could lose her nerve. Peace offering, she said, holding out the black coffee like it was a treaty scroll. Logan looked up, squinting against the morning light. The coffee cup hovered between them, steam rising, fingers close, but not touching. He wiped his hand and took it. You deliver now? Only to grumpy mechanics with trust issues. A flicker of amusement danced at the corner of his mouth. You're persistent. I'm curious. He leaned back on his heels, sipping. Curiosity gets people in trouble around here. So does assuming everyone's exactly who they seem to be. Their eyes locked. Something passed between them, tentative, electric, unnamed. Logan looked away first, but slowly. You always been like this? Zoe tilted her head. Like what? Sharp. Soft-spoken. Mysterious as hell. I've always been something, she said. But I haven't always known what. His eyes didn't leave hers this time. Zoe cleared her throat and crouched beside him, careful not to touch the puddle of oil. What's wrong with it? Logan glanced at the truck. Fuel pump shot. Owner tried to fix it with YouTube and prayer. Dangerous combination. He chuckled, low and warm. You know cars? I know systems, she said. Machines talk to each other if you listen hard enough. Logan nodded, impressed but not showing it too much. I thought you were just a barista. Zoe's heart did a nervous somersault. Maybe I'm just someone who needed to disappear for a while. He looked at her then, not suspicious, but curious. The kind of gaze that didn't demand explanations, just waited for them patiently. Something about that made her ache. The day passed in a blur of coffee orders and cautious glances. Zoe moved through her shift with practiced grace, but her mind kept looping back to Logan, how he spoke in careful sentences, how his hands told stories even when his mouth didn't. She liked watching him when he didn't know. The way he leaned into engines like they whispered confessions only he could hear. The way he moved like he was braced for impact, not from machines, but from people. Every time their eyes met, she felt a flicker of something wild and stupid blooming in her chest. Want, yes, but also recognition. At 3:30, he walked in. Again. You lost? She teased as he approached the counter. I thought I'd test the coffee under less violent circumstances. Zoe smiled and handed him a cup before he asked. Already brewing your patterns, she said. You're predictable. And you're dangerous, he said, taking a sip. Zoe blinked. Why? Because you say very little, but think a lot. She wasn't sure whether to be flattered or afraid. They sat at the window counter for 10 minutes in a silence that didn't press down, but stretched like fabric between them. You ever miss wherever you came from? Logan asked suddenly. Zoe looked out the window. I didn't come from far. Just a version of this place that had more eviction notices. He studied her. But you left. I had to. Or I'd still be choosing between power bills and groceries. He nodded, like he knew the math. Now, she continued, voice keyed. Now I wonder if I left something important behind. Logan's brow furrowed. Like what? People. Belonging. Something rooted. He didn't respond right away. Just sipped his coffee. Then, softly, the past's heavy, but it makes good ground if you plant something new. Zoe felt those words curl into her ribs and settle like seeds. That night, she opened her laptop, but couldn't code. Instead, she wrote. Logan speaks in metaphors he doesn't realize are poetry. Maybe I came here looking for data. Maybe I found something more dangerous. Maybe I want to be seen. Rain hit the pavement like fingertips on piano keys, soft at first, then surging into rhythm. Flatbush Avenue shimmered in streaks of silver and red as traffic slowed, and a distant siren wailed into the night. Zoe stood at the cafe's front window, arms crossed, eyes distant. The power had flickered once, then surrendered completely, taking the machines, the lights, and the humming refrigerator with it. Jessa had already bolted, muttering about not wanting to get trapped in a blackout with a ghost machine. Zoe stayed. She liked the quiet. Outside, the garage across the street was still lit barely. A single emergency bulb cast a golden triangle onto the sidewalk like a lighthouse. Logan was still inside. Zoe hesitated only a second before grabbing her coat. Inside the garage, it smelled like oil, rust, and time. Logan was hunched over the bench, a small portable lantern casting light across a maze of socket wrenches and cracked fenders. "You're still working?" Zoe asked, stepping inside. Her voice echoed strangely in the dim light. He didn't look up. Generator kicks in, just enough to keep things from flooding. She moved closer. "Mind if I join?" He gestured to the stool near him. "Sure. But you might get motor oil on your metaphors." She smiled and sat. "I'm off duty. Just a girl in the dark, with nothing to lose." Logan looked at her then. Really looked like she wasn't just the woman who served him coffee or spilled it on his shirt, but something he was slowly deciding to trust. "You don't talk about yourself much," he said. "I prefer questions to answers." He leaned back, running a rag over his fingers. "That a defense mechanism?" "Probably," she said. "But it sounds prettier when I dress it in philosophy." They both laughed, quiet, unexpected. Then silence again. Comfortable. Zoe watched his hands move with deliberate grace as he reassembled something unidentifiable. Her gaze softened. "You're good with your hands." He glanced at her, one brow raised. "That's supposed to be flirtation?" "Observation," she replied. "But the overlap is flattering." A beat. Then he said, "You don't belong here." The words stung, but his voice wasn't cruel. Just certain. Zoe didn't answer right away. Instead, she asked, "What does belonging even mean?" He wiped the metal part clean, set it down carefully. "It means when you leave, people notice." Her breath caught. "No one noticed when I left," she whispered. Logan turned toward her. Then they were blind. Zoe blinked rapidly, swallowing something sharp. He didn't know who she really was. Didn't know she'd disappeared into an empire of code and silence, then resurfaced as a ghost in her own hometown. But somehow, he still saw her, or the part of her she'd forgotten to protect. "You're not who you pretend to be," he added, softer now. Zoe met his eyes. "Neither are you." Their gazes locked like a wire pulled tight between them. She didn't know who moved first, but suddenly, they were close. Too close. His breath smelled like coffee and sweat and earth. Hers tasted like panic wrapped in want. "You don't ask why I'm here," she murmured. "I figure you'll tell me if I'm worth knowing." Her heart thudded. God, he was dangerous. Not because of what he could take from her, but because of what he offered, truth without demand, presence without pretense. She looked down, suddenly shy. "What if I disappoint you?" He leaned in, just enough that she could feel the hum of his heat. "Too late," he said. Her eyes shot up. His smirk curved, low and deliberate. "You've already ruined black coffee for me. Now everything else tastes like a question." Zoe laughed, breathless. Lightning flashed through the windows. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It vibrated with things unsaid. Want. Worry. A shared sense that the moment could turn into something else if they let it. But Logan stood. He picked up a flashlight, clicked it off and on, then handed it to her. "You should get home before the rain floods the streets." She hesitated, eyes searching his face. "You always this careful?" "Only with things I don't want to break." The words wrapped around her ribs and squeezed. She nodded slowly, then stepped back. "Good night, Logan." "Night. See." She froze. He'd used her nickname, the one she'd made up, the one that was hers and not hers. She left the garage with a storm behind her, and another one blooming in her chest. Later, in bed, Zoe didn't sleep. Instead, she watched the city lights crawl across the ceiling and typed a new note to herself. He's peeling back my walls like they're paint, one layer at a time. I don't think I want to stop him. Chapter 3. Ghost Signal Sue. The next morning dawned with a sky like brushed steel. Gray light filtered through the cafe windows as Zoe prepped espresso shots with mechanical calm, her body in the motion but her mind spiraling elsewhere. She hadn't dreamed. Or maybe she had, but it hadn't been sleep. Just fragments. Logan's voice in the dark, the smell of rain, drenched pavement, the way he'd said Z like he knew who she was, even though he didn't. Her fingers trembled slightly as she twisted the portafilter into place. Not from nerves. From the splintering truth beneath her skin. She was falling. Or at least leaning. And she couldn't afford to. The bell above the cafe door jingled. She looked up, expecting Logan. But instead, there he was. Cameron Duke. His suit was charcoal, razor-pressed, and offensively expensive. His expression, unimpressed, impatient, and dusted with condescension. Cameron always looked like he'd just walked out of a room full of mirrors and hated what he saw, but blamed everyone else. Zoe's stomach dropped. He didn't wave. Didn't smile. Just stood there, this uninvited shadow from the life she'd been trying to breathe away from. Z, he said, his voice slicing through the chatter like a scalpel. Zoe forced a smile. You're out of place. I could say the same about you. She gestured toward a booth in the back. This way. As they sat, Cameron's eyes swept the room like a buyer surveying undervalued property. Charming. You always did have a thing for broken neighborhoods. Zoe folded her hands in front of her. Why are you here? Cameron leaned back, spreading his arms across the seat like he owned it. Investors are getting antsy. Your silence is starting to feel like insubordination. They don't fund visionaries who vanish into diners. It's a cafe. And you're wearing an apron. Zoe's jaw tensed. This was the plan. Embedded research. On the ground feedback. A real-world pilot site. You signed off. We signed off on a 2-day site visit. You've been here almost 2 weeks. He dropped a folder on the table, its slick black edges glinting like a loaded weapon. Meanwhile, synapse numbers are plateauing, and the board's attention is drifting. You can't just disappear when things get complicated. Funny, she murmured. That's exactly what I'm doing. Cameron's mouth curved, but it wasn't amusement. You think you're above your own empire. But Zoe billionaires don't get to be romantic. You think this, he gestured vaguely around the cafe, makes you real. It doesn't. It makes you vulnerable. And maybe that's exactly what I want to be. He leaned in. Want all you like? But if you don't get your head back in the game, I will pull funding from CivicLink before you can hang your first inspirational poster. Zoe's blood turned cold. You wouldn't. Try me. She stared at him, breath shallower than she liked. Cameron stood, smoothing his jacket. You've got 3 days. Come home. Or CivicLink. D's before it's born. As he turned to leave, she called after him. Stay away from the garage. He glanced back, one brow raised. Ah. So it is personal. The door slammed behind him. The walk to the garage felt longer than usual. Zoe's hands were stuffed deep into her coat pockets, fingers curled into tight, silent fists. She wasn't used to rage that burned slow. Usually, it detonated, got solved, got buried. But this threatened the future. And the fragile thing forming in the present. Logan was outside, sleeves rolled to his elbows, talking to a boy no older than 10. She watched for a moment, watched the way Logan crouched to the kid's level, gesturing toward a busted bicycle wheel with deliberate, patient hands. He wasn't just kind. He saw people, not as products or problems, just as they were. Zoe swallowed the lump in her throat. She waited until the boy rode off, wobbling proudly on the fixed tire before stepping forward. Hey, she said softly. Logan turned, smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. You bring peace offerings again, or just good company? She tried to smile back, but her mouth felt stiff. Neither. I needed to see you. Something shifted in his eyes. Alertness, maybe concern. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaning against the car behind him. "You okay?" "No," she said, too quickly, then laughed once dry and small. "Not really." Logan didn't press, just waited. She took a breath. Someone from my old life showed up today. Someone who thinks they own a piece of me. Logan's jaw flexed slightly. Ex? Worse. A handler. He frowned. "You in trouble?" Zoe shook her head. "Just tangled. I've spent years building something huge. Something that was supposed to help people, and now I'm being told I'm wasting time by being here." He stared at her. "Are you?" "No," she said. "This is the first time I've felt anything in months." Logan's voice was low, but steady. "Then stay." She blinked. "What?" He stepped closer, just enough for the scent of motor oil and citrus soap to slip between them. "Stay until you find what you came here looking for. Not for them. For you." The lump in her throat returned. "What if I don't know what I'm looking for?" Logan reached up and tucked a damp strand of hair behind her ear. "Then we figure it out." They sat on the hood of Logan's beat-up Chevy under the bruised sky, knees almost touching, silence thick but companionable. The air smelled like ozone and rust. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, sharp and anxious. Zoe didn't speak. She didn't have to. Not yet. Logan passed her a thermos of coffee, lukewarm, bitter, perfect. "Wasn't planning on staying open this late," he said, eyes scanning the darkening street. She sipped. "Wasn't planning on falling apart." His lips twitched. "You don't look like someone who falls apart." "That's the trick," she said, tracing the metal seam of the thermos. "I only do it in places no one's watching." "Lucky me, then." She looked over at him. He was leaning back slightly, elbows behind him. Gaze upward now, watching clouds curl like smoke across the sky. There was something weary in the lines at the corners of his eyes, something too old for 33. "What about you?" she asked softly. "You always this generous with your space?" He exhaled through his nose. "Not really." "Why me?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe because you don't flinch when things get quiet." Zoe smiled, slow and sad. "I grew up in quiet. The heavy kind. Not peace, just absence." Logan's hand drifted to the edge of the hood, fingers brushing metal. "Yeah," he said after a pause. "I know that one." He didn't look at her, but she heard the shift in his voice like the ground had cracked open, and something real was rising through. "My dad died when I was 20. Heart attack in the garage. He was under a 2092 Ford. Went out mid-sentence." Zoe's breath caught. "I was upstairs fixing carburetors for extra cash. I came down when it was already done." Just a stillness that didn't make sense. "I'm so sorry," she said gently. Logan shrugged, but the movement was sharp, brittle. People said it was peaceful. But peace is what you earn after the chaos. He didn't get that. He got stolen. Zoe's hand moved before she could stop it, resting lightly on his knee. That kind of silence doesn't go away. He glanced down at her hand but didn't pull away. "After that," he continued, "Mom split. Couldn't handle it. Left me with the shop and 2 siblings who still thought monsters lived in closets. I fixed cars during the day and homework at night." He smiled, but it was jagged. "My little sister, Emma, she got a full ride to college. Pre-law. She doesn't know how to change a tire, and I don't want her to. That was the deal." "You carried all of them," Zoe said, her voice a whisper. Logan nodded. "Still do. In my way." Zoe watched him. Not just the man sitting in front of her, but the boy who lost everything under the weight of oil and grief and kept moving anyway. She saw the mechanic. The brother. The quiet man with wild hands and a scarred heart. And she felt something dangerous take root inside her. A wanting. Not just for his body or his mouth, or the warmth of him next to her in the dark, but for his trust. For the raw, stubborn, fragile thing he was barely letting her glimpse. "I wish I'd met you sooner," she said. He turned to her, eyes darker now. "Wouldn't have mattered," he said. "You weren't ready then, and neither was I." The streetlights flickered on, one by one, casting soft halos across the sidewalk. Zoe exhaled. "What are you afraid of, Logan?" His mouth twitched like he wanted to lie, but didn't. Letting someone in just to watch them walk away. She looked at him, really looked, and her voice cracked on the edge of something true. "I'm not going to run." But even as she said it, part of her knew a storm was coming. Not of thunder or wind, but of truth, and when it hit, it would leave wreckage in its wake. Logan nodded once. "I hope not," he said. And then, he leaned in. Slow. Careful. Intentional. His lips brushed hers like a question. And for one quiet, aching second, she let herself say yes. That night, Zoe didn't write in her notebook. She just lay in bed, fingers touching her mouth, replaying that kiss in slow motion, and wishing desperately that secrets could stay buried under pavement and stars. Chapter 4. Miles Between Masks. The sun cracked open the sky the next morning like yolk spilled over slate, bright, messy, and strangely hopeful. Brooklyn felt quieter on Sundays, the city pausing to catch its breath. Zoe didn't go to the cafe. She couldn't. Not after that kiss. Not with the memory of Logan's mouth still lingering like espresso on her tongue, warm, dark, and impossible to forget. She paced her apartment barefoot, wearing an old hoodie, and knew a regret. Why had she let it happen? Why did she want it to happen again? The knock on her door was a surprise. A knock, not a buzz. Quiet, sure, firm, like someone who wasn't asking permission, just offering presence. She opened it. Logan stood there, sun behind him, hand in his jacket pocket. He looked, grounded, as always, but different too, like he was trying to hold something back and failing. "Hey," he said. Her heart flinched. "Hey," she replied. He handed her a paper bag and a coffee. Bribery. She opened the bag. Chocolat croissant. Still warm. "I figured if I showed up empty-handed after yesterday, I might be seen as presumptuous." Zoe smirked, stepping aside. "You're already presumptuous." He stepped in. "You let me kiss you." "I let you think it was your idea." Logan laughed, a low, rich sound that rolled through her chest like distant thunder. She suddenly felt too aware of her bare legs, too aware of how close they were in the small space. Her breath stuttered. "So," he said, hands in his jacket now. "There's a junkyard outside the city I've been meaning to visit. Real classic salvage stuff. Used to go there with my dad. I thought..." He scratched the back of his neck. "You want to come? Get out of town for a few hours? See something that isn't coffee or carburetors?" Zoe blinked. "A road trip? Is this a date?" Logan's lips twitched. "Only if you want it to be." She hesitated. She had meetings to reschedule, Cameron's threat still pulsing like an ulcer under her ribs, and an empire threatening to shatter if she didn't return to it soon. But Logan's eyes, steady, quiet, and real, were the only thing in her life not built on code or compromise. "I'll get my shoes," she said. They drove with the windows down, music, low blues guitar, and gravel-voiced singers humming from the old stereo. The city peeled away behind them in layers, brick and glass giving way to warehouses, which melted into long highways flanked by scrub and trees. Zoe sat sideways in the passenger seat, legs tucked under her, one hand cradling her coffee, the other resting on the faded denim between them. She felt like a version of herself she hadn't met before, looser, slower, laughing without checking for microphones. "Did you always know you wanted to fix things?" she asked after a lull. Logan glanced at her, the corners of his mouth relaxed. "Cars, yeah. People, not so much. You think people can't be fixed?" He shrugged. "I think some people don't need fixing. Just someone willing to sit with them while they figure their shit out." She stared out the window, swallowing the sudden heat behind her eyes. He made it sound so simple. But nothing about her life, her lies, her empire, her name was simple. She changed the subject. "What about the road trip? Why a junkyard?" Logan grinned. "You can tell a lot about a person by what they leave behind, and how long they wait before trying to get it back." Zoe smiled faintly. "Pudik, Mr. Price. I'll deny it in daylight." The junkyard was a patchwork cathedral of rust. Towers of car parts lined dirt paths like skeletal monuments to movement and decay. Wind chimes made from mufflers clinked gently in the breeze. Cats slinked between engine blocks. Somewhere, a radio crackled an old rock song no one had listened to in years. Zoe stood in awe. "This is art," Logan said, stepping beside her. "At least to me." They wandered. He told her stories about a busted 2067 Mustang. He and his dad once pulled from this same yard. About the scar on his wrist from a rogue radiator fan. About how some machines never want to die. She listened, not just to the words, but to the cadence of his voice when he spoke about memory. About loss. About devotion. It wasn't just the mechanics of things that drew him in, it was their stubbornness, their refusal to quit. "You see yourself in them," she said softly. Logan blinked. "What?" "These machines. You save them. You bring them back when they've been left behind. You fix the things people give up on." He looked at her, and for a moment, the space between them thinned to breath and pulse and silence. "I don't fix everything," he said. "Some things, I just learn how to carry." Zoe's heart thudded. So did her guilt, because she was lying. Every time she let him call her Z, every time she laughed without saying where that laugh came from, every time she pretended to just be a girl in a hoodie, she was falling, and it wasn't fair. Still, when he reached for her hand and linked their fingers together, she didn't pull away. Not yet. They drove home with dusk bleeding into the windshield, painting their faces in orange and blue. The quiet between them wasn't absence, it was density. Like gravity. Like waiting for something to fall. Logan's hand rested on the gear shift, fingers occasionally brushing hers when he changed gears. Each touch was small, accidental, except that neither of them moved away. Zoe watched the light catch in his profile, the strong line of his jaw, the furrow in his brow that never fully smoothed. She wanted to memorize him, not just how he looked, but how he felt. How silence didn't feel lonely when he filled it. "I used to think love was supposed to feel like a fire," she said suddenly. Voice soft. Logan glanced at her, curious. But now... She looked out the window, watching the trees blur past. "Now I think it's more like water." He raised a brow. "How so?" "It wears through you slowly. Quietly. Without permission. And by the time you notice, there's a canyon inside you shaped like someone else." The car rolled over a stretch of cracked asphalt. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Then Logan said, "Maybe, or maybe love's a tool." She looked at him, surprised. He continued, "Not a weapon, not something flashy. Just a wrench that fits the bolt no one else could turn." Zoe smiled, something warm blooming in her chest. "That's the most romantic thing I've ever heard someone say about hardware." He grinned, a little sheepish. "Just don't quote me in poetry slams." They pulled over at a scenic overlook an hour outside the city. The sun was sinking behind the tree line, setting fire to the horizon. Below them, the world stretched wide and indifferent. But up here, in the cab of an old truck, time slowed to a crawl. Logan reached into the glove box and pulled out a pack of gum and a faded Polaroid. He handed it to her. The photo was old, maybe 10, 15 years ago. A younger version of Logan, taller than the two kids flanking him, grease on his shirt, pride in his eyes. "My siblings," he said, "taken the day we reopened the shop after Dad passed." Zoe's thumb hovered over the photo's edge. "You look like you were holding up the world." "I was," he said simply. "Still am, some days." She handed it back carefully. "You've never left, have you?" He shook his head. "People like me don't leave. We anchor." Zoe swallowed. "What if anchoring means drowning?" Logan turned toward her, voice low. "Then the right person learns how to float beside you." The air in the truck thickened. Zoe turned to face him, heart hammering so loudly she was sure he could hear it. "I don't know how to be what people want," she whispered. "I don't want anything from you," Logan said, "except the truth." She looked away. Then, back. Her lips parted, but nothing came out. "Not I built a company you've probably cursed under your breath. Not, my real name is Zoe Nakamura, and I've lied to you every day since we met. Not I'm terrified that I'm going to break something I never deserved in the first place. Just silence. Logan reached over, brushing a thumb along her cheek. You don't have to tell me today, he said gently, but you will. Her breath hitched. He leaned in and kissed her. Not like yesterday. This was slower. Hungrier. Not a question, but a recognition. His lips pressed into hers like a promise, one that hummed along every nerve ending and dissolved her resistance molecule by molecule. She felt herself unraveling, not in panic, but in relief, like finally exhaling after holding your breath too long. When they broke apart, the last sliver of sun disappeared behind the trees. Zoe rested her forehead against his, eyes closed. I don't know how to do this, she said. Logan's hand cupped the side of her neck. You don't have to. Just stay. They drove the rest of the way back in quiet again, the kind that felt less like silence and more like music without lyrics. Zoe stared out the window as the city lights reappeared on the horizon. She knew this couldn't last. Secrets always rot at the edges before they collapse. But tonight, she gave herself permission to be Z, to be kissed, to be wanted, not as a symbol or a CEO or a tech wonderkind, but just as a woman in a truck beside a man who didn't ask for more than her presence. And for now, that was enough. Chapter 5, Cracks in the Veneer. It started with laughter. A rare, open-throated kind that surprised even Zoe. She sat cross-legged on the garage floor, grease-stained napkin in one hand, half-eaten donut in the other, while Logan mimicked a customer who had insisted on emergency detailing for a rusted-out Civic with a raccoon in the back seat. And then, Logan said, eyes bright, he offered to pay in crypto kibble. Zoe doubled over. You're lying. Logan held up 3 fingers. Swear on my wrench collection. You need to write a book, she said, catching her breath. Tales from the pit. He grinned. Only if you do the illustrations. Stick figures with smug expressions. Zoe smirked but didn't respond. Her eyes drifted toward the open bay door, where the late afternoon sun spilled into the garage like liquid gold. She had spent most of the day here after skipping her cafe shift with little more than a text to Jessa. It had been too easy to stay, too easy to pretend she wasn't standing on a knife's edge. Logan passed her a soda from the mini-fridge and leaned against the tool chest, watching her with that steady, unblinking gaze that made her feel exposed and safe at once. You're quiet, he said. She twisted the cap off, pretending the fizz held her answer. Just tired. Liar. He said it gently, but the word lingered. Heavy. Zoe swallowed. It's hard to be in 2 places at once. You're not, he said, walking closer. You're here. You have no idea how untrue that is. His hand settled on either side of her face, calloused thumbs brushing the edges of her jaw. Z, he murmured. Whatever you're carrying, you don't have to hide it. She nearly broke. Because the temptation to fall into him to confess everything, to beg for understanding, was terrifying in its intensity. He was becoming an anchor, and she was still pretending she was weightless. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't move. Then it buzzed again. And again. She finally sighed, pulled it free, and felt the blood drain from her face. 5 missed calls. 3 from Cameron. 1 from her lawyer. 1 from board member 2. The last message simply read, Zoe, where the hell are you? C. D. What is it? Logan asked, voice tightening. She stood quickly. Work. He frowned. I thought you didn't do work on Sundays. Apparently, work didn't get the memo. He watched her pace, the shift in her energy as obvious as a slammed door. Is this about the project? Zoe nodded. Sort of. Not really. Completely. Do you want to talk about it? No. Yes. God. Yes. But she couldn't, not without unraveling the lie she was living. Not without revealing that the woman standing in his garage was a hologram with a billion-dollar shadow behind her. So instead, she said, Not tonight. Logan nodded slowly. Okay. And that made it worse. That he trusted her silence. Later that night, Zoe stood in front of her bathroom mirror, fingers gripping the edge of the sink like a ledge. She stared at herself. Not Z, the barista. Not Zoe Nakamura, founder of Synapse, heiress to the future of civic tech. Just the space in between. The imposter. She remembered the way Logan's hand had lingered on her neck, the way he looked at her like she wasn't a storm waiting to level his world, and she hated herself a little for letting him believe it. She picked up her phone. Typed, "I need to tell you something." Paused. Deleted it. Typed again. "I haven't been honest with you." Deleted it. Turned off the phone completely. Crawled into bed. And for the first time in weeks, dreamed of losing him. Logan found her the next day sitting on the back steps of the cafe, her knees drawn up, coffee cooling untouched beside her. The usual shield she wore, wry smiles, clever deflection was cracked at the edges, and the cracks looked like exhaustion. She didn't hear him approach until he sat beside her. No words. Just presence. Zoe closed her eyes and exhaled, as if she'd been holding her breath for days. "Want to get out of here?" Logan said after a moment. She opened her eyes. "Where to?" "Somewhere I don't have to watch you unravel in public." She blinked, startled. "Is it that obvious?" He didn't answer, just stood and held out a hand. She took it. The shop was quiet when they arrived, his younger brother gone for the day, the doors pulled half-closed against the breeze. Logan led her to the back office, where the lighting was soft and the silence had no edges. The air smelled like cedar and old leather, and the shelves were cluttered with framed photos, loose wires, and the soft mess of someone who had been too busy surviving to curate. Zoe leaned against the desk. Logan didn't sit. He paced once, then stopped. "I used to have panic attacks." Zoe looked up. He didn't flinch. "After Dad died," he continued, "and Mom left. I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I feel like my own body was rejecting me. I'd sweat through the sheets. Couldn't breathe. Thought I was dying." Zoe didn't speak. "I didn't tell anyone," he said. "Not Emma, not my brother. They needed me strong. Reliable." "You were a kid," she whispered. "I was all they had." He finally looked at her, something naked in his expression. "I haven't felt it in years. That kind of drowning." "And now?" she asked, voice small. "Now I feel something else." He stepped toward her. "You walk into a room, and I feel everything go quiet. Not empty. Just still." Zoe's throat tightened. "You make me feel like maybe it's okay to stop holding it all together," he finished. Her heart cracked open in the worst, most beautiful way. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something real." His brows drew together. "Okay." She took a breath. "My name." "It's not Z." Logan's expression didn't change, but the air shifted, like the moment was holding its breath. Before she could say more, her phone buzzed. Again. And again. Reluctantly, she pulled it from her pocket. Unknown number. Blocked caller. C. D. 3 new messages, stacked like loaded dice. Civic Link launch rumors are out. If you don't come back tomorrow, I go public. Enjoy the next 24 hours, Zoe. Her vision tunneled. The breath she had prepared for confession vanished into ash. What is it? Logan asked. She looked at him, this man who trusted her without conditions, and saw the impact coming like headlights through fog. I need to leave for a bit. There's something I have to take care of. His face shifted, but only slightly. That quiet disappointment she'd feared, the one that said, "I knew it was too good to be true." "Zoe," he said softly. Hearing her real name on his lips nearly undid her. She turned away before he could say anything else. Back in her apartment, she slammed the door shut and let herself fall apart. The truth had almost made it to the surface. Almost. But now the countdown had begun. 24 hours until everything exploded. 24 hours to make a choice. Hide. Or finally step into the light. Chapter 6. 2 worlds. 1 lie. The Manhattan skyline glittered like a cruel promise, sharp-edged, luminous, and entirely indifferent. Zoe stood outside a high-rise on 57th, her reflection caught in the curved glass doors. Her hoodie was gone. In its place, a tailored slate. Gray coat, clean lines, quiet power. The kind of armor that made people step aside without knowing why. She had avoided this building for months. But Cameron had forced her hand. She stepped inside. Security nodded without question. The elevator whisked her up 43 floors like a memory she hadn't asked for. The hum of the city dulled beneath her, until it was just her pulse and the dull click of her heels against marble. The boardroom smelled like citrus and money. Stark white walls. A table long enough to divide empires. Cameron was already seated, tapping something into a glassy tablet, his expression as warm as a blade. "Look who remembered her access badge," he said without looking up. Zoe slid into the seat opposite him. "Let's skip the sarcasm. Why the threat?" Cameron set the tablet down with theatrical care. "Because ghosting the company you built from scratch while our competitors eat our market share isn't sustainable leadership. It's negligence." She crossed her legs. "I took a sabbatical, with board approval, 6 weeks ago. What you're doing now," he leaned forward, smile tight, "is self-sabotage." Zoe's spine stiffened. CivicLink was always part of the plan. The board signed off. Not anymore. She blinked. "What?" Cameron slid a document across the table, her own executive summary, now slashed with red-line comments, and the word "shelved" scribbled across the header. "Major investors are pulling out. They think you've gone soft. That you're chasing sentiment over scalability." Zoe's jaw clenched. "Because I want to build something with meaning? Because you've fallen off the radar and started playing waitress in Brooklyn?" Her heart skipped. He knew. He'd known. Cameron leaned back, smug. "You're lucky I haven't leaked the whole story already." "What do you want?" she asked, voice tight. "To remind you who you are." Zoe stood slowly, hands flat against the table. Her voice, when it came, was ice wrapped in velvet. "Don't confuse absence with amnesia, Cameron. I remember exactly who I am. And who you're lying to." That struck deeper than she let show. "I'm leaving," she said. "Do it," he said, voice gleaming. "But when you do, know this: if you don't walk back through this door in 24 hours with a full public recommitment, I'll make your secret public. Synapse. CivicLink. And your little mechanic in Flatbush?" He smiled. "They'll all learn who Zoe Nakamura really is." The subway ride back to Brooklyn felt like traveling between galaxies. Her face was blank, but her thoughts screamed. She hated him. Hated his smugness, his manipulation, his weaponization of her past. But mostly she hated the lie she'd let grow roots. Logan. She thought of his hand on her jaw, of the way he said her name like it meant something sacred, and she thought of the way his eyes would darken when he realized she hadn't been brave enough to say it sooner. Back in the garage, Logan ran a hand through his hair for the 5th time, glancing at the clock on the wall. Zoe hadn't messaged. Not since yesterday. She wasn't at the cafe. Her phone went to voicemail. He tried not to overthink it, tried to believe this was normal. Life. But something hollow had started to form in his chest. A dull echo where her presence had been. He leaned against the workbench and stared at the photo of his siblings, pinned beside the spare keys. Then at the notebook she'd once left behind, its corner peeking out from under a pile of rags. Curious, he opened it. Inside. Not recipes or doodles or journal entries, but sketches, wireframes, notes, data models, predictive behavior analysis, AI-assisted infrastructure design. And at the top of one page, scrawled in shorthand, CivicLink, prototype for Brooklyn pilot. His brow furrowed. Then he flipped another page. There it was. Neat, typed, Founder, Zoe Nakamura. The name punched the breath from his lungs. He stepped back. Cold spread through his chest like frost across glass. She had lied. Not just about her name, but everything. The garage looked the same. Grease-streaked counters. The soft murmur of an engine cooling somewhere in the back. The scent of metal and gasoline and something that had, until now, smelled like home to her. But as Zoe stepped through the half-open bay door, the air felt colder. Logan was waiting. Not working. Not pretending. Waiting. She stopped a few paces away, The familiar ache in her chest eclipsed by something sharper. She saw the tension in his shoulders. The stillness in his hands, too controlled to be casual. "Hey," she said softly. He didn't move. "Where have you been?" he asked. "Midtown." He gave a slow nod. "Right. Business?" She hesitated. "Yes." Another nod. Then, "I read your notebook." Zoe froze. He met her eyes finally, and it nearly broke her. Not because he looked angry, but because he didn't. He looked hurt. Hollow. "You lied to me," he said. Her throat worked. "I didn't mean to." "No?" His voice was quiet, but sharp around the edges. "Because from where I'm standing, this whole thing was a performance. The name, the job, the coffee, all of it. It wasn't a performance," she said quickly. "It was me trying to be someone real for once." He stepped closer. "You are real, Zoe. You just didn't think I could handle who you were outside this block." "That's not true." "Then why didn't you tell me?" She didn't have a clean answer. Because she was scared. Because Cameron had made her feel like power and love couldn't coexist. Because something about Logan made her want to forget she had built an empire in the first place. And that, in itself, had been selfish. "Because I didn't know how," she whispered. He exhaled, gaze dropping. "Zoe Nakamura, tech billionaire, founder of Synapse. You live in two worlds and neither of them ever included me. That's not fair." "No?" He looked back at her, voice low. "You came into my world and made me believe this was mutual, that I could trust you, that this was real." "It was real," she said, stepping forward. "Then why do I feel like the punchline in someone's undercover exposé?" Her breath caught. "Do you know what it's like," he continued, "to be told you're worth something by someone who's built their life around avoiding people like you?" Tears pressed against her throat. "I never avoided you," she said. "I wanted you." "You still do." He stared at her, jaw clenched, breath shaky. "You let me fall for someone who didn't exist." "I'm still her," Zoe whispered. "Z is real. That wasn't a lie. It was just incomplete. A pause. Then, and now it's over." She flinched. "Logan, please. I can't do this," he said. "I've spent my life trying to hold things together that were always about to fall apart. I can't do it again. Not with you." Silence. And then he walked past her, slow, final. The door closed behind him like a period on the chapter she never wanted to write. Back in her apartment, Zoe stood in the center of the living room, numb. Outside, the city pulsed with light and noise. But inside, everything was still. Too still. She sat down and pulled the notebook into her lap, opened it to the Civic Link page. Her dream. Her truth. Now weaponized. Everything she had built on the verge of unraveling. But she didn't cry. She stared at the page until her vision blurred and whispered, to no one at all, "I didn't want to lie. I just wanted to be loved before I had to be everything else." Chapter 7. The Weight of Walls. The boardroom was ice and glass and silence. Zoe stood at the head of the obsidian table. Every inch the tech queen they'd invested in hair pinned back like a crown. Dark slacks, sculpted to move like strategy. Voice steady enough to slice marble. "I'm not here to negotiate," she said. A few of the board members exchanged wary glances. Cameron didn't flinch. "I'm here to reclaim what I created." The tension in the room was the kind that usually accompanied lawsuits. Cameron tapped his pen against his legal pad. "We're all eager to hear how you plan to clean up the PR firestorm you lit." Zoe raised a brow. "What firestorm?" He smirked. "You think no one noticed? You, working in a cafe, playing local hero, kissing a mechanic under the Brooklyn sky? You think that doesn't make headlines when someone leaks the right angle?" She didn't blink. "You leaked it. I packaged the truth. What people do with it is up to them." Zoe crossed the room slowly, deliberately. "Civic Link was never about optics," she said. "It was about building a bridge between the disconnected and the digital. That means getting dirt under your nails. It means shutting up and listening before you design solutions for people you don't understand." Cameron sighed. And what it also means is opening yourself to risk. You walked away from Synapse for this. For an idea. For some fantasy of belonging. She stepped closer. Belonging isn't a fantasy. It's a need. And if you'd ever felt displaced in your own life, you'd know that a flicker of something dark crossed his face. But it passed. You want to move forward with CivicLink, he said, voice clip. Then you do it our way. Board managed. Controlled messaging. No more ghosting. No more disappearing into coffee shops and garage bays. Zoe smiled. And it wasn't soft. I'd rather burn it down and start over than let you hollow it out. Gasps from the other end of the table. Someone cursed under their breath. Cameron's expression hardened. You're bluffing. She pulled a folder from her bag and tossed it onto the table. Inside, the exit clause. Her rights. Her stake. The legal strategy she'd spent the last 12 hours assembling with her team. I'm not bluffing, she said. I'm building something better. With or without you. Outside, the air hit her like a slap, bright, cold, real. The decision hadn't healed anything. Not yet. But it had carved something open. A space. For truth. For her. She walked down Fifth Avenue not as the ghost of a founder, but as a woman who had finally chosen the long road home. But Logan's voice echoed with every step. You let me fall for someone who didn't exist. She stopped at the crosswalk and closed her eyes. What hurt the most wasn't the anger. It was that he wasn't wrong. Back in Flatbush, Logan stood at the edge of the shop bay, a wrench in his hand and a storm in his chest. Everything felt louder. The slam of doors. The grind of sockets. Even the silence between shifts. He'd read the headlines that morning. Reclusive tech billionaire poses as Brooklyn barista locals react. Zoe Nakamura and the billionaire disguise. Was it love or market research? The one thing he hadn't done was click the article. Because he didn't want to read someone else's version of what they'd shared. He already knew the facts. She had lied. And he had let himself hope. Logan? He turned. His sister stood in the doorway, holding a newspaper. You okay? She asked. Carefully. He shook his head. Not really. She stepped forward, pressing the folded paper into his hand. She's not who you thought, Emma said. But she's not who they're saying, either. He glanced at the photo on the cover, Zoe stepping out of her building, surrounded by flashing lights. Her face calm. Guarded. A version of her he'd never met. But then again, hadn't he? Hadn't she cried in his garage? Hadn't she offered coffee like a truce? Hadn't she kissed him like someone who was terrified of being seen and equally terrified of being invisible? She loved you, Emma added, quietly. She lied to me. She hid. That's not the same thing. Logan didn't respond, but he didn't throw the paper away either. He just sat down slowly, elbows on knees, and let the truth burn its way into him. The bell above the cafe door gave its usual soft jingle, but it sounded different now, less cheerful, more like a reckoning. Zoe stepped inside, wearing no disguise. No cap pulled low, no hoodie zipped to the chin, just a tailored coat left open, hair down, eyes calm. The barista apron, once her camouflage, was gone. Heads turned. Conversations stilled. Jessa stood behind the counter, halfway through pouring an oat milk latte. You're back, she said, cautiously. Zoe nodded. I came to return the keys. She slid them across the counter, the gesture simple but heavy. Jessa hesitated, then reached for them, her eyes scanning Zoe's face with something between betrayal and compassion. You could have told me, she said quietly. Zoe's smile was small. Sad. I didn't even know how to tell myself. A silence hung. Then Jessa offered a wry shrug. For what it's worth, you were still our best hire in 6 months. That nearly undid her. She stepped out before her gratitude cracked into tears. Across the street, the garage was open, wide and warm and familiar, and terrifying. Zoe didn't let herself think too long. She walked across the street like the ground might reject her, but it didn't. Logan stood near the back, his flannel sleeves rolled up, wiping his hands on a rag. He saw her before she spoke, but didn't call out. Didn't move. She stepped past the threshold. The scent of oil and earth hit her like memory. He waited. She stopped a few feet away. "Hi," she said softly. Logan's jaw flexed, but his expression didn't change. "You're bold. Showing up here." "I'm not here to explain," she said. "You already know the truth." He crossed his arms. Cautious. "I came to say that I understand if you never want to speak to me again. But I'm not hiding anymore. Not from you. Not from this place." Zoe reached into her coat pocket and held out a document slightly crumpled, printed on heavy cardstock. He didn't take it. "I bought the property next door," she said. "The old laundromat. CivicLink's first physical space. Community tech. Job training. Mentorship. Free internet access, designed for the people who actually live here." She swallowed. "I want to build something with roots. Not from the top down. From the sidewalk up." Still, he didn't speak. "I'd like you to be part of it," she added, quieter now. "Not because I need you to forgive me, but because you're one of the only people I've ever met who actually shows up. And I need people like that. This community needs people like that." She held his gaze. No performance. No pitch deck. No charm. Just truth. Finally, after a long moment, Logan stepped forward and took the paper from her hand. "Read it." His brow furrowed as his eyes scanned the letterhead. The proposal. The vision. When he looked up, something in his face had shifted, wariness still there, but softened. Like stone touched by water. "You're really doing this?" he asked. She nodded. "With or without me?" "Yes." He held her gaze. "That's the first honest thing you've said to me since we met." She nodded again. "I know." He folded the paper and tucked it into his back pocket. Then, finally, "I'm not ready." She felt her throat tighten. "I understand. But I'm not walking away yet." She blinked. "What?" "I'm not promising anything," Logan said, voice quiet but firm. "But if you're serious about this place, about showing up, then maybe we talk. Maybe we figure out what's still possible." Zoe's lips parted. Hope bloomed, but carefully. "I'll be here," she said, "as long as it takes." He looked at her like someone testing light through glass. Then he nodded once, slow and deliberate, and turned back to the car he'd been working on. Not dismissing her, just continuing. Zoe stepped outside with her chest full of something raw and trembling. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door left unlocked, and that was more than she had hoped for. Chapter 8. Foundations. The old laundromat still smelled like soap and rust. Zoe stood in the middle of the gutted space, her boots crunching over broken tile, sunlight streaming in through the half-boarded windows like hesitant promise. Stripped of its machines and dusted with a decade of disuse, the building had nothing left to offer except potential, and that was exactly why she chose it. A clean slate. She bent to pick up a fragment of shattered ceramic from what used to be the front counter and ran her thumb across its edge. It was sharp, honest, a shard of something broken that still caught the light. Just like her. Behind her, a pair of contractors walked the space, reviewing the blueprints she'd provided. The CivicLink Pilot Center was no longer theoretical. It was being built. Here, where she had lied, and listened, and loved. Even if the last part hadn't ended the way she'd hoped, she didn't expect Logan to walk through that door. But part of her still looked for him every time it creaked open. Across the street, Logan watched from the garage. He didn't mean to. Not deliberately. But every time he stepped outside with a new invoice or a lug wrench, his eyes drifted. She was always moving. Talking with contractors. Sketching notes in her leather-bound notebook. Laughing once or twice quiet, unguarded. She hadn't tried to corner him again. Hadn't begged, or explained, or pushed. She was just there. And that unsettled him more than any apology would have. She was building something, not a story or an angle. Something real. Emma passed behind him, catching his line of sight. "You know," she said, "you don't get points for stubbornness if it costs you something good." He gave her a look. Emma raised her hands in mock surrender. "Just saying. Sometimes people don't mean to lie. Sometimes they hide because they're scared." "She had every reason to trust me," Logan muttered. I gave her every opportunity. Emma schruchet. Or maybe she didn't need trust. Maybe she needed time. He didn't answer. But that night, long after the shop had closed and the streetlights hummed their soft electric lullaby, he crossed the road. The front door of the laundromat was open, warm light spilling onto the sidewalk. Zoe sat on the floor in leggings and an old sweatshirt, hair tied in a haphazard knot, blueprints fanned around her like petals. A pencil rested behind one ear, and her fingers were smudged with graphite and hope. She looked up, and when she saw him, something shifted in her face, not surprise. Not apology. Just stillness. Like the center of gravity had returned. Logan stepped inside slowly. His hands were in his jacket pockets, and for a moment, they just looked at each other, two people standing in the ruins of who they'd been. He cleared his throat. "You gonna need help with the electrical?" he asked. Her eyes lit not too much, just enough. "Probably," she said. "I'm guessing the grid hasn't been touched since the Clinton administration." He smirked. "I'll take a look tomorrow." Zoe nodded. Then, softly, "Thank you." He didn't respond. He just crouched, picked up a loose wire from the floor, and examined it. They worked in silence for a while. Her sketching, him inspecting, not touching, not laughing, but not leaving either. And maybe that was the beginning of something they hadn't found before. Not romance. Not repair. Just respect. Later that night, Zoe wrote in her notebook. He came back. Not to forgive me. Not yet. But to witness me becoming who I should have been from the start. The next morning, Logan arrived at the old laundromat with a tool belt slung low on his hips and an expression that said, "I'm here to work, not to talk." Zoe didn't push. She handed him the electrical schematics and stepped back as he crouched by the breaker box, flashlight between his teeth, eyes sharp with focus. Watching him work was like watching a dance that only he knew the rhythm to, quiet, efficient, grounded. There was something sacred about it. Not the labor, but the presence. He moved like a man who had spent his life earning space with his hands. She'd spent hers designing systems that removed people from the process. Now, she was learning to respect the hands that stayed. They didn't talk much that first hour. Just the sound of wires being stripped, circuits tested, drywall tapping hollow against metal studs. Zoe kept to her end of the room, outlining where the modular workstations would go. Scribbling notes in pencil, she kept sharpening down to stubs. Eventually, Logan stood and wiped his hands on a rag. "Wiring's shot. I'll need a day or two to replace the main junction." Zoe nodded. "You think it'll hold long term?" He tilted his head. "If we build it right, yeah." "We." The word landed softer than she expected, like possibility. She cleared her throat. "I can cover your rate market value, or more." Logan raised an eyebrow. "Not here for money, Zoe." "A beat. I'm here to make sure if this thing gets built, it won't fall apart." She bit the inside of her cheek. "And me?" He paused. "You're harder to trust than a fuse box in a thunderstorm." That stung. But she didn't flinch. "I'm trying," she said. "I know." They fell back into work, the kind of silence that had substance. Every small exchange a handoff of wire cutters. The brushing of shoulders as they passed felt charged. Not with anger anymore. With what if? By late afternoon, the light outside turned soft and gold. Zoe sat on the floor beside a cluster of open boxes, labeling routers for installation. Her hair had fallen from its knot, tendrils brushing her cheek. Logan watched her without meaning to. She caught him. He didn't look away. Her smile was gentle, uncertain. He swallowed, looked down, and knelt beside the nearest conduit panel. "I used to think love was like a house," he said suddenly, not looking at her. Zoe still. "You build it right the first time. Keep it clean. Stay out of the storm. It lasts." She listened, heart thudding. "But that's not how it works," he went on. "Sometimes you build it, and it still floods. Or the roof caves in. Or you come home one day, and it's empty." He glanced at her. "But sometimes, if it's worth it, you build it again. Better. Smarter." Zoe's eyes shimmered. "Are we talking about houses?" she asked softly. He shrugged. eyes warm but tired. Maybe. Zoe hesitated, then reached over and took one of his hands. Calloused. Warm. Steady. Not a promise. Not forgiveness. But contact. Logan didn't pull away. Later that night, when she was alone, Zoe stood in the middle of the space with all the lights off. The new bulbs Logan had installed buzzed faintly. She let the dark press in, but this time, it didn't feel like hiding. It felt like preparing. For something, someone, maybe even a future. Chapter 9. Soft Openings, Hard Truths. 2 weeks later, the front of the old laundromat looked nothing like its past life. A fresh coat of charcoal paint dressed the bricks. Wide glass panels replaced boarded-up windows, allowing sunlight to flood the interior. Inside, clean modular workstations lined the walls. A 3D printer hummed softly beside a sleek bank of donated laptops. The floor smelled faintly of new pine and electrical dust. But the energy? It pulsed with hope. The CivicLink pilot site was almost ready, and for the first time in a long time, Zoe felt like she was too. She stood in the middle of the room, watching volunteers affix the last of the wall decals. Access isn't charity. It's equity. A line she had once scribbled in the margins of a pitch deck, never meaning for anyone to read it. Now it sat 10 feet wide above the entrance. Jessa emerged from the back room, holding a tangled surge protector. You're officially 5 cables away from launch. Zoe smiled. Sounds like a startup name. Jessa snorted. 5 cables from launch. A tragedy in 3 acts. They both laughed. It felt good, easy. But Zoe's eyes kept drifting to the front window, where Logan stood. He hadn't crossed the threshold yet today. He had, over the past week, taken to showing up early, fixing everything from hanging lights to rewiring the AV system, but always leaving before the crowds arrived. Before cameras, before ribbon colors were discussed, she understood. Forgiveness was not measured in hugs or headlines. Sometimes it was just someone continuing to show up. At 3:00 p.m., she stepped outside with 2 coffees in hand. Logan was leaning against the hood of his truck, arms crossed, eyes hidden by the brim of his cap. I bribed you, Zoe said, holding out one of the cups. Again. He accepted it silently. They stood shoulder to shoulder, sipping, watching the street exhale its mid-afternoon breath. She's beautiful, Logan said after a minute, nodding toward the building. Zoe looked over. She? He shrugged. Spaces like that, they feel like someone, like they breathe. I wanted it to feel open. Like the opposite of everything I grew up in. Logan didn't speak for a beat. Then, you succeeded. A flicker of warmth stirred between them. A calm after many storms. Until a black car pulled up across the street. The kind that didn't idle. That arrived with intent. The back door opened, and Cameron Duke stepped out, suit immaculate, expression carved in stone. Zoe stiffened. Logan clocked it instantly. Friend of yours? Former investor, she said, voice clipped. Cameron crossed the street like the sidewalk owed him its alignment. He didn't acknowledge Logan, just stopped 2 feet from Zoe and smiled like a man who mistook charm for dominance. You've been busy, he said. Zoe sipped her coffee. And you've been predictable. I'm here to talk. I'm not. His smile sharpened. You really think this little side project's going to last? You're bleeding capital. And goodwill. I have enough of both, Zoe replied coolly. And more importantly, this isn't a project. Cameron took a step closer. We had an empire, Zoe. Now you're playing community center with a mechanic and some discount laptops. At her side, Logan's body went still. Hard. Zoe's fingers tightened around her coffee cup. I'm not playing at anything, she said quietly. I'm building something that doesn't need you in it. Cameron's eyes flicked to Logan for the first time. Must be nice, having someone who'll stick around as long as the wiring's loose. Logan stepped forward, slow and solid. Careful. Cameron raised both hands. Of course. Wouldn't want to startle the help. Zoe's voice cut through the air like tempered steel. Leave. Cameron blinked. This isn't your space anymore, she said. You gave up the right to shape it the moment you tried to control it. He paused, then gave a thin, mocking smile. Be careful, Zoe. The world isn't as romantic as you think. One ribbon cutting doesn't buy you redemption. No, she said, but it's a damn good start. Cameron turned and walked away, the air cooler in his absence. Zoe let out a slow breath. Logan looked at her. She didn't speak, just stared ahead, jaw set, heart loud, and for once, she didn't feel like running from the noise. That evening, Zoe stayed late. The street was mostly quiet now. Inside, she adjusted the last router setup, then pulled a chair to the middle of the room and sat down. After a while, she heard footsteps behind her. Logan. He carried a box of small hanging lights, the kind she'd mentioned offhand once. He set them down beside her. Thought the reading area could use a softer glow, he said. She looked at the box, then at him, and something inside her cracked open. I'm scared, she admitted. He didn't move. Scared this won't work, that I'll let people down, that I already have. Logan knelt beside her, elbows on his knees. You will let people down, he said. That's how building anything works. But you keep building anyway. A pause. Because sometimes, he added, the thing you build ends up stronger where it cracked. Zoe looked at him, eyes full. I don't know how to ask for another chance. You don't have to ask, Logan said. You just have to show up. The next morning, the block buzzed with a new kind of energy. Local press vans edged the curb. Students from the community college gathered near the mural wall, smartphones in hand. The mayor's office had sent a representative. A pair of former investors Zoe had quietly invited were pretending not to look impressed. Inside, the Civic Link space thrummed with anticipation. The doors hadn't opened yet, but already the scent of fresh paint and potential filled the room. Banners hung clean and proud. A printed quote stretched across one side of the room. Build like you're staying. Share like you're leaving. Teach like you're not the first to learn. Zoe stood in the far corner of the room, her back to the crowd. She stared at her own reflection in the window, shoulders squared, lips calm, eyes focused. There was no version of herself left to hide in. And for the first time, she didn't want to. Behind her, she heard Logan's voice murmuring instructions to a group of local volunteers installing final cable channels near the rear firewall. He had come early. Again, like he had all week. He hadn't said much. But he hadn't left. And somehow, that was louder than any apology. Zoe turned as he stepped toward her, wiping his hands on a cloth. You good? He asked, voice low. She nodded. I'm ready. He looked her over like someone double-checking the bolts on a newly rebuilt machine. His gaze wasn't skeptical. It was protective, but not possessive. He wasn't here to hold her hand. He was here to stand beside her. Logan held out a small pin circular, metal, the Civic Link logo etched into its surface. She blinked. Where did you? Made it at the print shop down the block. He pinned it gently to the lapel of her blazer. You needed something that said, this is yours. Her voice was thick. Thank you. He paused, then said, softly, I still don't trust everything. But I'm starting to believe the you I knew wasn't a lie. Zoe exhaled. That's fair. He stepped back. Show them what this place means. The ribbon cutting was small. Intentional. No champagne. No stage. Just a silk cord across the entrance, flanked by 2 middle schoolers from the local robotics team and a pair of elderly residents who had lived in the neighborhood longer than Zoe had been alive. She gave a short speech. Not from a podium. From the floor. She didn't talk about Synapse. She didn't talk about venture capital or media narratives. She talked about her mother. About the nights they ate dinner by candlelight because the power bill had gone unpaid. About how tech had saved her life and how it had also separated her from the people who raised her. I built Civic Link, she said, because no one should have to choose between staying connected and staying home. The crowd clapped, but it was the quiet afterward that mattered more. It was respect, not spectacle. When the ribbon was cut and the doors officially opened, Zoe stepped aside and watched the space come to life. Laptops humming, young people exploring, a father asking about coding classes for his son, a grandmother helping herself to the coffee station. And beside her, Logan, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the same thing she was, not just what she'd built, but who she was while building it. That night, when the crowd had gone and the lights were dimmed, she sat on the floor, exhausted and exhilarated. Logan sat beside her. Their shoulders brushed, and this time, neither of them pulled away. "You still scared?" he asked. "Only of what comes next," she said. He looked at her. "I'm not," he said. "Not anymore." She turned to him. This time, it was her hand that found his, and she didn't let go. Chapter 10. What Stays. Spring rolled into Brooklyn like a second chance. The trees along Flatbush Avenue wore tender green, the air thick with scent espresso, fresh pavement. And something else. Something new. Inside Civic Link, the buzz was quieter now. No more cameras. No press. Just real people doing real work. A coding class was underway in the back, and a job workshop was scheduled for the afternoon. The place had settled not into perfection, but purpose. Zoe sat behind the resource desk, sleeves rolled up, hair loose, no makeup. She'd been up since 5, writing grant proposals with black coffee and a playlist of instrumental blues. She didn't look like a CEO, and she didn't need to. Across the room, Logan knelt beside a flickering monitor, tapping wires into place. He'd become Civic Link's unofficial on-site maintenance tech, not paid, not titled. Just there. Every day. They hadn't defined anything. There were no, "Are we back together?" conversations. No declarations. But there was a toothbrush at her place, his hoodie on the back of her chair, the comfortable space between silence and warmth. That morning, he had brought her a bagel without asking how she liked it, and she'd eaten it without checking for judgment. That, to her, was intimacy. Not the kind written in headlines, but the kind you built like scaffolding. Quiet. Durable. At noon, the coding instructor wrapped up his class, and the teenagers filtered out, chatting and bumping shoulders. Zoe waved goodbye to one girl who had just deployed her first Python script, then stepped outside for air. The street was warm, familiar, but not static. She stood beside Logan's truck, sipping iced tea, eyes drifting to the mural painted on the Civic Link exterior. It was Logan's idea. He'd said the building needed more than windows. It needed memory. So now, across the wall in bold color, a line of figures drawn in mosaic silhouette, each holding a tool, a book, a keyboard, a wrench. Below them, in white paint, the words, "We build with what we carry." Logan joined her a few minutes later. "Front terminal's stable again," he said. She nodded. "I owe you a month's worth of bagels." He leaned against the truck beside her. "You already paid me." She glanced at him. "I did?" He nodded toward the mural. "You let the neighborhood tell its story. Not just yours." Zoe smiled, soft. "It's easier now. Being seen." He didn't speak for a moment. Then, "Do you miss it?" She turned to him. "Miss what?" "The old world. Synapse. Strategy meetings. Stock tickers. Private jets." Zoe took a breath. "I missed the part where I thought I had to be untouchable to be respected," she said. "But no, I don't miss that world." She met his eyes. "I found something better." Logan's hand brushed against hers. Not an invitation. A quiet statement. "You never needed to be untouchable," he said. "I just needed to be reachable." They stood like that for a while. Sun warming their backs, the Civic Link Center humming behind them. The city never stopped, but for once, it didn't feel like it would leave them behind. "Emma's teaching me how to budget grants," Logan said suddenly. Zoe turned, surprised. "Seriously?" He shrugged. "Someone's got to keep up with you." Her heart flickered. "You're staying." "I already stayed," he said. "Now I'm choosing to stay." That night, Zoe added a new note to her journal. It wasn't the kiss, not the confession, not the apology. It was this: 2 people, hands dirty, staying. Friday night brought light. Strung from the corners of the Civic Link ceiling were warm, hanging bulbs, crisscrossing the room like constellations. Folding chairs had been arranged in a wide arc. A long table near the entrance held homemade empanadas, jerk chicken sliders, sweet tea, and trays of plantain chips, all donated by local businesses. It wasn't fancy. It was alive. The first CivicLink community night. Not an event. Not a pitch. Just a gathering. Kids from the robotics class set up a demo station. Local poets scribbled stanzas in the corner, preparing for open mic. A high school student DJ played music from her cracked iPad, the bass bouncing gently against the floorboards Logan had reinforced just last week. Zoe stood off to the side, watching as people owned the space. This was why she came back. Not to fix. To listen. To build. "Thought you didn't like crowds," Logan said, joining her, hands tucked into the pockets of his dark jeans. "I don't," she replied. "But this isn't a crowd. It's a story." He nodded, gaze scanning the room. "Looks like it has a good ending." She glanced at him, smiling. "Or maybe it's just the beginning." A moment passed between them, one filled with a year's worth of silence, hurt, discovery, and something deeper. Zoe reached for his hand. He didn't hesitate. Their fingers laced like something remembered, not claimed, not conquered, just chosen. Later, as the room dimmed and a young woman took the mic, the rhythm of the evening changed. Her voice was low, sure, weaving words like rope, spoken word about lost names, neighborhoods erased, love written into the seams of concrete. Zoe leaned her head against Logan's shoulder. He didn't move. Didn't need to. They weren't holding each other up anymore. They were resting. Not perfect, but present. That night, Zoe locked up CivicLink with Logan beside her. No fanfare. Just keys turning. Lights off. A door that would open again tomorrow. Outside, the street was quiet. "You're still scared," Logan said, not as a question. Zoe looked up at him, eyes soft. "Always." "Me too." She smiled. "That's good." He raised a brow. "Why?" "Because scared people stay alert," she said. "And they don't take each other for granted." He kissed her, then gently. Not because the story demanded it, but because it was time. Epilogue. 1 year later, a new mural covers the west wall of CivicLink now. This one shows a pair of hands not holding, not reaching. Building. Between them, a tiny house of wire and code and light. Below it, words etched in Zoe's own script. "Love doesn't arrive. It becomes